Come on an early morning drive with me while I talk about how it took us 4 years to get the right supports for Elijah. 4 years. So I really have wonderful nostalgic memories of driving, specifically late summer nights with the windows wound down, no music, just the summer breeze coming through the windows and the sounds of nightlife whooshing by, the heady smell of jasmine. It's a core millennial memory of driving around when my best friend just got her license late at night and free. And so what better time to collect my thoughts than by going on a drive and just relaying our support journey, because we got the diagnosis for Elijah of autism, which I talked about in the earlier video. But then I was sort of left on my own to work out where to go next. And it was really quite overwhelming, to be honest, and isolating, because I had to make a lot of decisions myself with not much information. And I was asked by the NDIA, which is the agency that disperses disability funding, I was asked, what supports do you think he needs? And I didn't know. I didn't know how to answer that. I had to guess. And at the time he wasn't verbal, so I knew a little bit about speech and OT. We were already on early intervention pathways at that stage, so we did unlock funding before the diagnosis, but I was still sort of on wait lists and waiting for sort of more answers at that stage. So we were on the public wait list for speech, and we did see a speech therapist, and but it wasn't a while until we actually locked in a consistent speech therapist. And I honestly just Googled it. I just Googled speech therapy near me, and because I didn't know where to start, and I didn't know anyone that had any experience with an autistic child and the therapy that is available. And at the time that was the right decision for me, because I really just wanted to get him into something. But looking back, I think the priority really should be therapy that fits around your life and lifestyle. At the time I was working 3 jobs and had a small business, and of course therapy that is in tune with your child and holding out until you get the right therapists. And that's really hard, especially when you can book a trial session with a therapist, but you may be waiting on a wait list just for that trial session. And one session really isn't a good indicator of whether your child is going to engage with a therapist or not, or whether it's going to be appropriate for what they need. So that's really challenging. And there are a lot of therapies out there, not just speech therapy. There's occupational therapy, there's support workers, equine therapy, aqua therapy, art therapy, just to name a few. And when you get started, it's just like, I don't know where to begin. And there's also the fear of not spending your funding, because there's sort of a rumor that goes around that if you don't spend your funding, then you lose it. And that's if you even have funding. Not every single diagnosis unlocks funding. And of course, every country is different. I can't speak for America or UK or a lot of other countries. I only know that in Australia we have NDIS funding, but not every child is eligible for that. So we started with speech. At first it was fine. I didn't really have anything to compare it to, but as it progressed, it got harder and harder to get Elijah to go, and that was the first red flag. But at the time, I was so exhausted from trying to make decisions that I just felt like he was being defiant, but it wasn't. It was that he didn't want to go because it wasn't a good fit, and he wasn't engaging with the therapy. And I should have pulled him out then and there, but I didn't, and I do regret that, because it wasn't that the individual was not a good practitioner. I didn't really like her style, to be honest, and she didn't really engage Elijah. And also I didn't get a whole lot of strategies in order to implement at home. But I thought some therapy is better than no therapy, and I don't believe that anymore. I think that the discomfort of letting therapists go, that uncomfortable conversation, because if you're an introvert, it is quite an uncomfortable conversation, is far less taxing than going to a therapist every single week that isn't a right fit for your child and having to deal with the dysregulation before and after that therapy. It's better to take your time and slowly introduce therapists one at a time, and then trial and error whether they work. That is really difficult when you are starting from scratch, and we were. And we started from scratch again when we moved interstate. What I will say is take your time, really, really take your time to research what's on offer and what can work. We ended up doing about 3 different therapy sessions a week. We did speech, OT, and music. Music was great. Occupational therapy was a must for Elijah, and speech, yes and no. But quantity doesn't always equal quality. So you have to understand that just signing your child up for everything doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the right level of support, because it can be so tempting to just go for everything, to try things out. And it's fine to try things out, but every single week is a lot. I would space it out and introduce them slowly. Now, starting from scratch, which I did have to do recently, so as recent as about a year and a half ago, I joined a lot of local Facebook groups, seeing people ask questions about local services, especially within homeschool groups, because when you're homeschooling, you have the flexibility to enroll your child into a lot more therapy services and education services. And it wasn't really until I started going to local meetups with other neurodivergent parents, which did take a while, when I started getting the really good recommendations for therapists. Because you ask any other neurodivergent parent, they always know of a company that's doing really well, or a specific therapist or support worker who they absolutely would recommend. And when you get those names of people, of services that are recommended, they're the gold. And if you can get your name down, even if you have to wait in a wait list, do it, because when you have the right support, it just makes all of the difference, because it's not all equal. Some therapists don't even want you in the room. They want you to wait in the waiting room. Some therapists don't provide much feedback. You have to push them for feedback. Some therapists don't give you strategies at home. I've got therapists now that talk to me outside of business hours, which I don't expect that, but they just go above and beyond, and I would never expect any therapist to do that as a baseline. That's just an exceptional above and beyond experience. But what I do expect is to get regular feedback about what they're implementing and why, and also strategies that I can do at home. Because often I'd go to the therapy session, I wouldn't really understand what was going on. We'd come home and I'd have problems, and I'd want to deal with those problems at home and carry on the therapy at home. So little things like that, how your child responds in terms of transitioning to and from therapy is also a big indicator. And it's hard too, because it might not be a personal thing when it comes to the therapist. Your child just might not click with them, and it's nothing they've done wrong. And I've had plenty that there's nothing they've done wrong. They've tried really hard, but it just hasn't worked for us. So that's a big one as well. So it's about quality rather than quantity, asking around when you can. As soon as you start asking around and you start building those networks, all of a sudden All of these options come forward, especially if you're homeschooling, because there are so many more homeschooling resources and services out there now because of the growing need for resources that fit in with homeschooling, and a lot of them are therapy adjacent as well. So that's really exciting, knowing that it's out there, but it's about trial and error. And not getting too down on yourself if you try something that sounds amazing on paper for your child and then it doesn't work in reality. And I have done that a lot of times. I've signed him up for things and it's doing well for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks even, and then the engagement completely goes downhill and just feeling like you're back at square one. And letting go of that guilt, because you're trying as a parent and you want supports for your child, but you don't always know until you try something. So it's really important not to get too down on yourself when things don't work. And there's certain forks in the road that you'll come to. Using a driving analogy that wasn't actually planned, there are forks in the road that you come to where you'll have a professional, an allied health professional, say that your child needs a certain thing, and then you need to make the decision. Because even though this pediatrician is suggesting you do something, or this speech therapist or OT or whatever is suggesting you do something, at the end of the day, it's up to you as a parent to decide whether that is right for your child, because you know your child better than anyone else. And on one such occasion, I'll give you an example. Our pediatrician, the same one that diagnosed Elijah, wanted him in ABA. She strongly recommended it. She didn't say he has to be in it. But ABA for a lot of pediatricians is the gold standard. But if you ask anyone in the autism community, they'll tell you all about the controversies of ABA. And I remember wrestling with that for the longest time, because here's this professional that knows all about autism and she's saying ABA is the gold standard, you need to get him into it. And then meeting up with an ABA practitioner and having them be very forceful about getting more funding in so you can actually do the ABA, because ABA is a real full-time commitment. It's not just dropping like your child off once a week. It's really, really intensive, and there's a lot of families that absolutely will go nowhere near ABA, and there's others that say it's not how it used to be and they swear by it because it doesn't have a good track record in terms of historically. I won't go into all of the nuts and bolts of why it's a controversial therapy now, but I really didn't know what to do. And when you have a child, especially a young child who can't verbally communicate, you have to make a lot of tough decisions to advocate for them. You have to think about what is best for them because they can't tell you a lot of the time. And I've had other therapies, so we didn't go ahead with the ABA beyond the initial sort of meeting with that practitioner. I went back to the pediatrician and told her, and I was really worried that she'd lecture me for not going ahead with it, but she was like, oh, I've heard some pretty bad things about that particular one. And then that was the end of it. And, you know, all those sleepless nights, and she was like, whatever. So at the end of the day, she wasn't even that fussed, and I was the one losing sleep. And then another therapy that was recommended through our speech therapist was like a school readiness class, which was a mix of students, both neurotypical and neurodivergent. And she really highly recommended this before we started school. And I thought, great, it's a safe space. There's plenty of teachers and educators there to watch over them and sort of integrate them with different kids of different levels. But unfortunately, I overheard one of the educators talking really negatively about Elijah when I went to pick him up, obviously not knowing that I was within earshot. And sure enough, not long after that, they told me he needed one-on-one support, and I just felt really betrayed, because you think it's a safe space for your child, and then to hear them speaking like that about him, and he's there to get support because he has special needs, and you think, where is the understanding, where's the empathy, where's the patience that we're paying you for? And so not all services and therapies are neuroaffirming. They might claim to be, but they might not necessarily be. So you have to be very careful as a parent with the vibes, with your gut instinct. Because I trusted these people, and if they had a problem, they should have come straight to me. They shouldn't have been gossiping like that. And it was really, really hurtful. And to this day, I do get very sensitive and defensive if I ever hear anything negative about my child, because that's my child, that's my baby, and you're talking negatively about, he needs help. Of course he needs help, he needs support, he needs empathy, he needs compassion. And that's why we were there. We were there for support and help, because we knew he needed extra support. So it took me a long time to really trust therapists again after that, because they're human. I get that, and I understand that Elijah had problems in groups, and I just would have appreciated them to tell me that to my face, because we'd had problems in daycare as well. So it wasn't completely new to me, this whole problems with group dynamics. And daycare, it was the huge amount of kids in the room, and he would get dysregulated, and he would be quite violent and aggressive to other kids, and I had other parents complaining. I would pick him up from daycare, and the educators would just pull me to the side and just tell me all of the awful things that he'd done throughout the day, and how they just told all the kids to just stay away from him when he was dysregulated, because they didn't know what else to do, and he couldn't help it, and I couldn't be there to advocate and help them and implement things when things were going wrong. By the time I got there, it had been hours since said thing had happened, so I felt really helpless, and I used to just absolutely drown in all of this negativity when I'd go to pick him up every single time. And I'd be driving home with him, trying so hard not to cry and not to show him that I was crying, but to smile through the tears, because I know he was just a little boy. He was 4 years old, 3-4 years old. He was a little boy that was just struggling. And I'm not saying it's fine for him to hit other kids. That's never been okay. But I just felt like, how do I help him? They're telling me what's gone wrong, but I don't know how can I broach that with him when I'm taking him home, because he doesn't even really understand me. And I, at that point, didn't understand him, because he wasn't able to verbally communicate. It was both ways. He couldn't understand me, and I couldn't understand him on a very basic level. So how do I discipline that? How do I intervene with that? So it was very, very hard. And it still is at times. He is verbal now, but there's so much more to communication than just speaking. And a lot of people don't understand that. And I still get questions about what speech therapy is for. And yes, there are children that are completely non-verbal. There are children that just struggle with the neurological aspect of thinking of a thought and then speaking and processing. There's delays in receptive, so understanding, and expressive speaking. There's stutters, there's stammers, there's a lot. With speech therapy, there is a lot. And there's lots of different areas that kids need help with. And OT is more sort of life lessons, whether it's philosophical, how to deal with a neurotypical world when your brain isn't wired for that, or it could be as basic as toileting, as dressing. So OT is also very, very broad, and these are supports that are very much needed. But music therapy, that was amazing, but in a different way, because it was all about initiation, turn taking, but also the magic of music. For a lot of kids, it sort of breaks down the barriers that other therapies don't necessarily sort of tap into. And I've never done art therapy, so I can't really comment on that, but I've heard other parents absolutely love art therapy as well. So there is a lot out there to unpack, but I'll just go back to saying, don't feel like you're rushed into picking therapists, because it's really important that you have a supportive team that lifts you up. And when they're not supportive, you as a parent dread taking a child there, and you're paying for this service. You want to stretch your funds as far as possible, because everyone's got different budgets. Some people don't even have disability support funding, so it's so important that you pick the right ones. If you're paying out of pocket, it's even more imperative that you're careful about how those funds are spent. So even if you just had one really good support worker or one really good therapist, that's sometimes all you need, because they can help you as a parent, which they should, to equip you to help your child. So they work one-on-one with your child, but they also work with you to help you implement strategies at home, because you as the parent are the number one most important factor in all of it. No therapist is going to absolutely just take over and do everything without your input. I firmly believe that therapy should be a collaborative effort with parents and therapists. Even if you're not getting involved in the actual session, it should be you're bringing forth ideas and information, they're bringing ideas and information, and you go back and forth into what's working, what isn't working, and it's a continual process of evaluation, reevaluation, that kind of thing. And therapists that invite that and are comfortable with that are gold standard, in my opinion. If you can get therapists to come to your home, we're really lucky that one of our therapists comes into our home. That makes things a lot easier in terms of regulation. You don't have to worry about transitioning so much. If you have a therapist that is willing to go out into the community with your child, that's amazing if your child can cope with that. So if you have a support worker, or if you have an OT that's willing to go out into the community, that's made a really big difference for Elijah. Our OT started coming to our home and was doing that for the longest time. And then we started seeing his engagement drop off, so we troubleshooted it together. We both noticed that he wasn't engaging, and we worked together to come up with ideas as to how to re-engage him and make it meaningful to him, rather than just sitting at a kitchen table talking about the world. We went out into the world and we experienced things together with her, and it just made so much more sense to him. And our speech therapist always gives me ideas and strategies to try at home, so I feel empowered as a parent to have that knowledge. And they don't know everything, and that's okay. They're not experts, and that's okay, because they're not experts in your child. You're the one that knows your child the best. So it took us 4 years to really nail down our support team and be happy with where we're at. And half of that was out of our hands, in terms of OTs moving on or speech therapists not able to do the same hours anymore, and moving interstate. All of those was sort of out of our control. And some things were just, as I said earlier, not a good fit. They may have started being a good fit in the beginning and then became less so as time went on. So that's why it took us such a long time to have consistent support that we were happy with. So it's been about 1.5 years with the same therapist, and I'm really happy with our team. and it's okay to take time to get it right. You're doing an amazing job. Even if you've just made it this far in this recording, you care, and you will get there. Just don't be so hard on yourself. That's all I can say. Just take it one step at a time. And the fact that you care and that you're trying, even if you don't get it right, it doesn't matter. You just keep trying. And there's good therapists out there, and there's really genuine neuroaffirming services as well. And you'll find them, but it just takes time.